Her billionaire husband stood before 200 of the world's wealthiest art collectors and called her worthless. He didn't whisper it. He didn't say it privately where only she could hear. No, Julian Harwick lifted his champagne glass in a room dripping with crystal chandeliers and old money, and he announced to everyone that his wife, the woman he had promised to love and cherish, wasn't smart enough, cultured enough, or sophisticated enough to belong in his world. He said their marriage had maybe another year left. He laughed about finding someone more suitable, someone on his level, and every single person in that auction hall laughed with him. His mother nodded approvingly. His business associates clapped him on the back. His friends raised their glasses in a toast to his honesty. But here's where everything changes, because what happened next made Julian Harwick's jaw drop to the floor. And 5 years later, when his ex-wife walked back into that exact same room, the same auction house, the same glittering crowd, he couldn't even look her in the eyes. Now I need to ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to love you? Have you ever been told you weren't smart enough, talented enough, good enough to belong? Have you ever looked in the mirror and wondered if maybe they were right about you? Mara Sinclair spent 4 years believing her husband's lies. She shrank herself smaller and smaller to fit into the tiny space he allowed her to occupy. She apologized for existing. She forgot who she was, but one night, one moment of public humiliation changed everything. What she did next didn't just shock her husband. It transformed the entire art world. And by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why the people who try to break you are often handing you the keys to your own freedom. This is her story, and trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment of it. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Andy Love Stories. If you're new here, let me tell you what this channel is about. This is your home for stories that will touch your heart, challenge your spirit, and remind you of the incredible strength you carry within yourself. Every story I share has a purpose, to uplift you, to inspire you, and to show you that no matter how dark things seem, there is always a path forward. Before we begin today's journey, I want to speak a blessing over your life. May every person watching this find the courage to walk away from anyone who makes them feel less than extraordinary. May you discover strength in the moments when you feel weakest. May you find hope when you feel lost in the darkness. And may you experience love that builds you up instead of tearing you down. You are worthy exactly as you are. Never forget that. Now, my family, I have a small request before we continue. This channel is fighting to reach the people who need these stories most. YouTube only shows our videos to new viewers when you engage with the content. So if you haven't already, take 1 second to tap that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. And as we journey through Mara's incredible transformation together, I want you to drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had someone underestimate you? Have you ever been told you weren't enough? I read every single comment, and your stories inspire me to keep creating. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. To a woman who had forgotten her own worth. To a room full of people who would witness her destruction and her resurrection. The Pemberton auction house was the kind of place where fortunes changed hands as casually as handshakes. Crystal chandeliers cascaded from ceilings that stretched toward heaven, scattering light across walls lined with masterpieces worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. The air smelled like expensive perfume and older money, that particular scent of wealth so established it had stopped trying to prove itself. Mara Sinclair stood near the entrance, her fingers nervously smoothing down the burgundy gown she had saved for 3 months to purchase. She watched her husband work the room like the king he believed himself to be, shaking hands with men whose net worth required scientific notation, kissing the cheeks of women who would never accept her as one of their own. She had been married to Julian Harwick for 4 years. 4 years of learning to be invisible. 4 years of perfecting the art of taking up as little space as possible. 4 years of forgetting that she had ever been anything other than an accessory to his life. But Mara hadn't always been this person. Listen carefully, because this is important. Before Julian, Mara had been an artist. Not famous, not wealthy, but passionate in a way that made her feel alive with every brushstroke. She had grown up in a small coastal town where her mother taught her that beauty existed everywhere if you had the eyes to see it. She had worked 2 jobs to put herself through community college while filling every spare moment with painting. Her tiny apartment had been a cathedral of creativity, canvases stacked against every wall, paint staining the floorboards, the smell of turpentine mixing with the coffee that kept her awake through long nights of creation. She had been happy, truly happy. Then she met Julian at a gallery opening. He was handsome, charming, and fascinated by what he called her fresh perspective on art. He pursued her with an intensity that felt like worship. He told her she saw things other people missed. He called her brilliant. She didn't realize until much later that what he actually found attractive was the challenge of diminishing something bright. The erosion happened slowly. So slowly she didn't notice until it was too late. First, it was subtle suggestions. Maybe you should focus less on painting and more on learning about the art world. You know, the business side. Then it became gentle criticism. That piece is interesting, but it's not quite gallery quality, is it? Then, outright dismissal. Mara, let's be realistic about your abilities. He convinced her to move into his mansion, where her art supplies looked shabby against the expensive furnishings. He suggested she store her canvases somewhere more appropriate, which meant the basement, then the garage, then eventually nowhere at all. One day, Mara came home to find her studio space had been converted into a wine cellar. Her supplies had been donated to a local school. Julian had smiled while explaining it was for the best. You need to focus on being a wife now. That's a full-time job in my world. She hadn't painted in 3 years. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. Tonight, as she stood in the Pemberton auction house watching her husband charm people who would never see her as an equal, Mara felt the familiar weight of her own disappearance pressing down on her chest. Mara, darling, couldn't you have found something more appropriate to wear? The voice cut through her thoughts like a blade wrapped in silk. Cordelia Harwick materialized beside her daughter-in-law, resplendent in emerald silk that probably cost more than Mara's entire wardrobe. Julian's mother had made her disapproval clear from the day they met. Her son was destined for someone with proper breeding, proper education, proper everything. Mara was none of those things. This is a sophisticated crowd after all, Cordelia continued, her eyes scanning Mara's dress with barely concealed contempt. I know you did your best with what you have, but still, one would think after 4 years, you would have learned how to present yourself appropriately. The guests nearby turned to look. Mara felt their gazes cataloging her dress, her simple hairstyle, her shoes that weren't quite designer enough, finding her wanting in ways both visible and invisible. She manufactured a smile. The same smile she had been wearing like armor for 4 years. I thought simple was elegant, Mara said quietly. Simple? Cordelia repeated the word as if tasting something rotten. Well, that's certainly one word for it. She drifted away, trailing expensive perfume and casual cruelty, leaving Mara alone with the stares of strangers who had witnessed her humiliation. But here's what you need to understand about cruelty delivered in public. It's designed to do more than hurt. It's designed to remind you of your place, to make sure you never forget that you don't belong, that you never will. The auction began shortly after. Mara took her assigned seat beside Julian, who barely acknowledged her presence, too engrossed in a conversation with the man on his other side about investment portfolios and market projections. When the servers brought out champagne, a man named Victor Ashworth leaned across the table toward Mara. His smile was friendly, but his eyes held that particular blend of curiosity and condescension she had learned to recognize. So, Mara, what is it you do? Julian never quite says. Before she could open her mouth to respond, Julian's voice overrode hers. Mara keeps our home running smoothly. It's plenty for her capabilities, trust me. He laughed, and the table laughed with him, the sound rolling over Mara like a wave she couldn't escape. She used to have artistic aspirations, if you can believe it. Little paintings, very sweet, very amateur, but she's settled into a more realistic role now. More laughter, always more laughter. Mara stared at her champagne glass and said nothing. She had learned that speaking only made things worse. The evening's centerpiece was announced as the auction neared its climax, a previously unknown work by Eleanor Vance, a 19th century painter whose reputation had been recently rediscovered by art historians. When the painting was revealed, Mara felt her breath catch in her chest. It depicted a woman standing at a window, her back to the viewer, looking out at a storm-tossed sea. The brushwork was extraordinary, bold and delicate at once, capturing both the violence of the waves and the stillness of the figure watching them. Something about the woman's posture spoke of desperate longing, of hope held against impossible odds, of a soul waiting for something better than what life had given her. Mara understood that woman completely. She felt as if she was looking at a portrait of her own heart. Starting at $2 million, the auctioneer announced. Julian raised his paddle immediately. Mara watched him compete against 3 other bidders, his jaw tight with that particular determination he reserved for things he wanted to possess. Not appreciate, not understand, possess. At $4.7 million, the other bidders dropped away. Sold to Julian Harwick. Applause rippled through the room. Julian stood, accepting congratulations, basking in the admiration of people who measured worth in dollars and status. Someone shouted for him to make a speech. Julian never refused an opportunity for attention. Now pay attention, because this is the moment that changed everything. Julian lifted his champagne glass, and the room fell silent with anticipation. Mara felt her stomach twist into a knot of dread that she couldn't explain. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Julian began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "This painting represents something I've always believed. True art requires true breeding. Eleanor Vance came from a family of artists. Her talent was inherited, refined, cultivated by generations of sophistication. You can't fake that kind of pedigree." He paused, taking a long sip of champagne. Mara watched his eyes scan the room before landing on her. "Speaking of pedigree," Julian continued, and something cold slithered down Mara. "Spine, my own wife, as many of you know, had artistic aspirations once." Laughter from those who had heard the earlier comments. Mara felt her cheeks burning. She used to paint little pictures. Thought she might be an artist herself. I keep telling her that talent isn't something you can will into existence. Some people are born to create beauty. Others are born to appreciate it from a safe distance, where they can't embarrass themselves. More laughter. Louder now. "But I want to be honest with all of you tonight, because you're my friends, and I value honesty above all things." He looked directly at Mara. His eyes held nothing but contempt. "I give this marriage maybe another year, tops. Mara's a sweet girl, but let's be real. She's just not on my level. Not intellectually, not socially, not in any way that matters. She went to community college, for God's sake. My mother keeps asking when I'll find someone more appropriate, and honestly, I think she has a point. Some mistakes you make when you're young, the smart thing is to correct them before they become permanent." The room erupted. His associates howled with laughter, clapping Julian on the back like he had just delivered the punchline to the greatest joke ever told. Someone shouted, "Finally being honest." Cordelia sat at the head table, nodding approvingly, her smile sharp with vindication. Mara sat frozen. She saw it all through a strange fog, as if watching the scene from somewhere very far away. The laughter, the pointing, the pitying glances from those few who weren't amused but were too cowardly to speak. Across the room, she noticed one face that showed something other than amusement. Oliver Quinn, Julian's friend since university, looked like he might be sick. But he said nothing. He had said nothing for 4 years while watching Julian slowly dismantle her piece by piece. Julian sat back down and leaned over to kiss Mara's cheek. His breath smelled like expensive champagne and casual cruelty. "Don't take it personally, sweetheart," he whispered, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "You knew what this was." Something inside Mara cracked. She had been cracking for years, small fractures spreading through her sense of self like fault lines through stone. But this moment, this public execution of her dignity, was the earthquake that finally brought everything down. And here's what nobody expected. When Mara shattered, she didn't break into pieces. She broke free. She stood up from the table. The movement was so unexpected, so contrary to everything she had trained herself to be, that conversations faltered around her. Heads turned. The laughter died. Julian looked up at her with annoyance. "Mara, sit down. You're making a scene." But Mara wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking at the painting, Eleanor Vance's masterpiece, the woman at the window watching the storm. And she understood something she hadn't understood before. That woman in the painting wasn't waiting for the storm to pass. She was preparing to walk through it. "You're absolutely right, Julian." Mara's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Clear, calm, steady as stone. Julian blinked, momentarily confused by this unfamiliar version of his wife. "I'm sorry?" "You're absolutely right," Mara repeated, walking toward the painting. "Why wait another year? Why waste 12 more months of both our lives pretending this is something it never was?" She stopped in front of the painting, her back to the crowd, just like the woman in the frame. "This painting is extraordinary," she said softly, but her voice carried in the silence. The way she captured longing, the way she made hope visible in the midst of chaos. It's the kind of art that speaks to your soul, if you have one. She turned to face the room, to face Julian. "You see $4.7 million. You see status, you see something to possess and display and brag about, but you will never, not in your entire life, understand why this painting matters. Because understanding art requires empathy. It requires the ability to feel something beyond your own ego. And Julian, you have never felt anything that wasn't about yourself. Gasps rippled through the room. Julian's face went red with rage. Mara, I'll have my attorney contact yours by Monday morning. Mara's voice didn't waver. Enjoy your acquisition. Enjoy all your acquisitions. Things are all you've ever known how to love. And people like you always end up alone with your things, wondering why none of them keep you warm at night. She walked toward the exit. Spine straight, head high. Past the whispers and the stares, past Cordelia's outraged face, past Oliver Quinn who watched her with something that looked like awe. She walked through those doors and into the night, and she didn't look back. The cool air hit her face like a blessing. Mara stood on the sidewalk outside the Pemberton auction house, shaking with adrenaline and terror and something else, something that felt dangerously like freedom. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. Then again, she looked at the screen through tears she hadn't realized were falling. The first message was from Oliver Quinn. I've watched him destroy you for 4 years. I'm sorry I never said anything. I was a coward. You deserve infinitely better than anything his world could offer you. If you need anything, and I mean anything, I'm here. He doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Mara stared at those words, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't name. Then a second message appeared. There's something you need to know about Julian. Something I should have told you before you married him. It's important. Can we meet tomorrow? A taxi pulled up to the curb. Mara looked back at the auction house, its windows glowing with warm light and cold people, and thought about the woman she had been when she met Julian Harwick. Confident, creative, full of dreams about building something meaningful with her life. She thought about the woman she had become, apologizing for existing, believing herself worthless, shrinking smaller and smaller to fit into spaces he had convinced her were all she deserved. Then she thought about her mother, dead 5 years now, taken by cancer before she could see what her daughter had become. The last thing her mother had told her echoed in Mara's mind. Baby girl, never let anyone convince you that their opinion of you matters more than your own. The day you do, you stop being yourself and start being their reflection. And reflections don't have souls. Mara typed her response to Oliver with steady hands. Tomorrow. Tell me everything. She climbed into the taxi. As it pulled away from the Pemberton auction house, Mara didn't look back. She was done looking back. My beautiful family, pause with me for just a moment. Mara just walked out on everything she knew. She has no plan, no money of her own, no connections that aren't through her husband. She just publicly divorced a billionaire in front of 200 witnesses. And Oliver Quinn is about to reveal something that will change how she sees everything she's been through. Now I need to ask you, have you ever had a moment like this? A moment where you chose yourself, even when it meant losing everything familiar? A moment where you said enough even though you didn't know what came next? Drop it in the comments below. Type the words "I chose me" if you've ever walked away from someone who didn't deserve you. I want to see those words flooding the comments because every single one of you who has made that choice deserves to be celebrated. And if you're watching this and you're still in that situation, still shrinking yourself for someone who doesn't see your worth, I want you to keep watching. Because what happens next in Mara's story might change how you see your own possibilities. Hit that like button if you're ready to see Mara rise. Let's continue. The cafe where Mara met Oliver was small and unremarkable, the kind of place that served strong coffee and didn't ask questions about why your eyes were red from crying. She arrived early, hands wrapped around a cup she couldn't bring herself to drink, and waited. She had spent the night in a hotel room. Not a fancy one. She'd paid with the emergency credit card she kept hidden from Julian, the one he didn't know about, the one she'd maintained for 4 years just in case. Just in case of what, she hadn't known until last night. Just in case she ever needed to escape. She had lain awake in that anonymous room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of her marriage, seeing patterns she had been too close to recognize, understanding, finally, how systematically she had been dismantled. Oliver arrived looking wrecked. His tie was crooked, his eyes bloodshot, his usual polish replaced by something that looked like guilt given physical form. He slid into the booth across from her and didn't bother with pleasantries. There was a woman before you. Mara's coffee cup trembled in her hands. Her name was Renata Vance. Mara's eyes widened. Related to the painter? Eleanor Vance? Oliver nodded, his face grim. Her great-great-granddaughter. That's how Julian met her, through the art world. Renata was a curator at a small gallery, brilliant, passionate about preserving her ancestors' legacy. She had plans to write a definitive biography, to create an exhibition that would travel internationally. He paused, and Mara could see how much it cost him to continue. Julian did to her exactly what he did to you, convinced her she wasn't sophisticated enough for his world, told her that riding on her ancestors' coattails wasn't the same as having her own talent. He got her to give up her career to support his collecting ambitions, traveled with him to auctions, managed his acquisitions, did all the work while he took all the credit. What happened to her? He left her right before she would have been promoted to director of a major museum, just discarded her, told her she was holding him back, that he needed someone who could actually keep up with him intellectually. Oliver's voice cracked. Last I heard, she's working at a small frame shop somewhere. Never went back to curating, never wrote that biography. It's like he hollowed her out and left the shell. Mara felt sick. Another woman, another life destroyed by the same hands that had held hers at their wedding. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out raw. Before I married him. Why didn't anyone say anything? Because I'm a coward. Oliver met her eyes, and she saw tears forming in his. Because Julian has been my friend since we were 18 and I wanted to believe he'd changed. Because admitting I'd watched it happen before meant admitting I'd done nothing to stop it. I told myself it would be different with you, that maybe you would be the one to change him. He laughed bitterly. But that's not how it works, is it? People like Julian don't change. They just find new victims. He slid a piece of paper across the table. A phone number written in careful handwriting. That's Renata's contact information. You don't have to call her, but I thought you should know. You weren't the first, and if someone doesn't stop him, you won't be the last. Mara stared at the paper. The numbers blurred as tears filled her eyes. Does his mother know? About Renata? About how he operates? Oliver's expression darkened. Cordelia knows everything. She taught him to be what he is. Convinced him from childhood that people are commodities, ranked by education, breeding, social position. That feelings are weaknesses and relationships are transactions. She destroyed him first, Mara. Then he destroyed Renata. Then you. He stood, leaving money on the table for both their coffees. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it took me this long to say something. I'll help you however I can. Lawyers, contacts, whatever you need. I owe you that much. I owe you more than I could ever repay. After Oliver left, Mara sat in that cafe for another hour. The easy thing would be to take whatever settlement Julian's lawyers offered, disappear to some other city, rebuild quietly, where nobody knew her name or her shame. The hard thing would be to stay, to face him, to become someone he could never diminish again. Mara had spent 4 years taking the easy path, agreeing, accommodating, shrinking. She was tired of easy. She called Renata that afternoon. They met at a park overlooking the river. 2 women who didn't know each other but shared a wound shaped exactly like Julian Harwick. Renata was older than Mara had expected, with tired eyes and paint-stained fingers that picked nervously at the edges of her jacket. He told me Eleonora would be ashamed of me. Renata stared at the water, unable to meet Mara's eyes. My own ancestor. He said I was riding on her legacy without deserving any of it, that I should stick to administrative work and leave the real art appreciation to people who understood it. I'm so sorry. I had perfect grades before I met him, Renata continued, her voice distant with memory. I was on track to become the youngest director in the museum's history, after Julian. I couldn't focus, couldn't write, couldn't look at a painting without hearing his voice telling me I didn't understand it, that my perspective was worthless. She finally looked at Mara, and her eyes were ancient with grief. When he left, I tried to go back, tried to reclaim what I'd lost, but it was like he'd reached inside me and removed something essential, the confidence, the belief that my voice mattered. I've spent 5 years working in a frame shop, Mara. 5 years staring at other people's art because I can't trust myself to have an opinion about it anymore. Mara reached across the bench and took Renata's hand. We're going to prove him wrong, she said. Both of us. I don't know how yet, but I refuse to let him be the final word on either of our lives. Something flickered in Renata's eyes, a spark that had almost gone out, catching a breath of oxygen. You really think that's possible? I think we don't have any choice but to try. The divorce proceedings were exactly as cruel as Mara had expected. Julian's lawyers painted her as a gold digger, even though she'd asked for nothing except her freedom. They produced witnesses who testified that she was mentally unstable. They implied she had married Julian under false pretenses. Mara didn't fight back. She didn't want his money. She didn't want anything that had his fingerprints on it. Julian himself oscillated between drunk phone calls at 3 a.m. where he begged her to come back, or "didn't mean it, you know I didn't mean it, you're overreacting," and sober conversations with mutual acquaintances where he claimed she'd had a mental breakdown. She let him talk. Words were all he had left, and words couldn't touch her anymore. The papers were signed on a cold Tuesday morning. Mara sat in her lawyer's office and officially severed herself from Julian Harwick. She asked for nothing. She took nothing, except her freedom. That she took with both hands. Walking out of that building, she felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of his expectations, his criticisms, his casual cruelty, all of it lifted from her shoulders like a physical burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. She was no one now. She had nothing. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like the best starting point she could imagine. Mara rented a tiny apartment above a frame shop in the city's arts district. The irony wasn't lost on her. The frame shop was exactly the kind of place Julian had mocked, exactly the kind of career Renata had been reduced to. But Mara saw something different when she climbed those narrow stairs to her new home. She saw walls she could cover with her own work. The apartment was small and drafty. The radiator clanked. The windows let in cold air around their edges. But it was hers, every imperfect, wonderful inch of it. For the first month, she didn't paint at all. She couldn't. The brushes felt foreign in her hands, like tools that belonged to someone else, someone she barely remembered being. But she started buying supplies anyway. Just having them in the corner of her apartment felt important. A promise to herself that she would try when she was ready. Then one night, unable to sleep, she picked up a brush. What came out wasn't beautiful. It was angry. Dark colors slashed across white canvas, chaos and grief rendered in furious strokes. She painted until her arms ached and tears streamed down her face. And when she finally stepped back, she saw Julian's face in the darkness of the canvas. She painted over it. And that felt like the first real victory. Over the following weeks, she kept painting. Every night after her other work was done, she would stand at her easel and let the emotions flow out through her hands. The canvases piled up, some angry, some sad, some tentatively hopeful. She wasn't painting for anyone else to see. She was painting to remember who she was. By day, she worked at an art restoration company she'd found through a job listing online. The work was meticulous, repairing damaged masterpieces with patience and precision, learning the chemistry of pigments, understanding how time and neglect and violence could wound art and how skilled hands could heal it. The hours were long. The pay was modest, but every day she learned something new. Her supervisor was a woman named Helena who had spent 40 years preserving paintings that most people would have declared lost forever. Helena was sharp-tongued and demanding, but she noticed things other people missed. "You have a gift," Helena said one evening, watching Mara work on a delicate restoration of a 17th century still life. "Not just technique, though you're developing that nicely. You understand what the artist was trying to say. You can feel their intention. That's rare." Mara looked up from her work, surprised by the compliment. "I just try to listen to the painting." Helena smiled, a rare expression on her weathered face. "That's exactly what I mean. Most people look at art. You listen to it. That's a gift, young lady. Don't waste it." Mara stayed late that night, thinking about what Helena had said. Understanding artists, seeing souls through brushstrokes, listening to what paintings were trying to say. Maybe that was her unique skill. Not just creating art, but truly seeing it, in ways Julian never could, in ways most collectors never bothered to try. The idea came to her at 3 in the morning, while she was standing in front of her latest painting, a canvas that glowed with something that finally looked like hope. An auction house, not one that treated art as currency, not one that valued price over meaning, one that connected collectors with artists through story, through soul, through the human experience that made art matter in the first place. She couldn't afford to build such a thing. She had no connections in the art world, at least none that weren't tainted by association with Julian. She had no reputation except as the woman Julian Harwick had publicly humiliated. But she had something else. She had years of watching how the art world actually operated. She had insight into what collectors truly wanted beneath their status-seeking. She understood the loneliness of wealthy people, surrounded by beautiful things that meant nothing to them. And she had absolutely nothing left to lose. Mara started small. She spent her evenings and weekends networking at gallery openings, introducing herself to artists whose work moved her, connecting with collectors who seemed intimidated by the traditional art world. She created a simple website, nothing fancy, just a blog where she wrote about artists she loved, telling their personal stories rather than just listing their credentials. She approached emerging collectors differently than anyone else in the industry. Instead of trying to sell them pieces, she asked them questions. What made them happy? What moved them? What did they want to feel when they looked at art? Then she connected them with artists who could provide that feeling. Within 6 months, she facilitated her first significant sale, a young sculptor's work placed with a collector who genuinely loved it, who would cherish it, who would build a relationship with the artist rather than just writing a check and walking away. The sculptor wept when Mara called to tell her the news. The collector called the next day to say the piece had changed her perspective on art entirely. Word spread. More artists approached Mara, hoping she could help them find collectors who would appreciate their work for what it truly was. More collectors sought her guidance, tired of the pretension and exclusivity of traditional auction houses. She rented a small gallery space, barely more than a renovated storage unit, and began hosting intimate events where artists could speak about their work directly to potential buyers. No pretense, no posturing, just human beings connecting through creative expression. Remember this, it becomes important later. Renata became her partner. It happened gradually. Mara had been having coffee with Renata weekly, building a friendship forged in shared wounds and mutual healing. When Mara started her gallery, Renata began stopping by to help, organizing events, offering curatorial insights, sharing the encyclopedic knowledge of art history she'd never lost even as she'd lost faith in herself. "You should do this officially," Mara said one evening as they cleaned up after a successful artist showcase. "Partner with me, Sinclair and Vance." Renata's hands stilled on the wine glass she was drying. "You want my name on your business? I want your mind, your expertise, your eye." Mara smiled. "And honestly, I think working together would be good for both of us. We can build something neither of us could build alone." "Julian would hate it," Renata said slowly. His ex-wife and the woman he destroyed before her, working together, succeeding together. "Is that a yes?" Renata laughed, a real laugh, the kind Mara hadn't heard from her before. "That's a hell yes." Sinclair and Vance was born that night. 2 women with wounds shaped like the same man, turning their pain into something neither of them had dared to imagine. "My family, Mara has come so far." She walked out of that auction house with nothing but her dignity. She rebuilt herself from the ground up. She started a business that's beginning to change lives, artists finding homes for their work, collectors discovering meaning, Renata smiling again for the first time in years. But the question remains, will she ever face Julian again? Will he ever see what she's become? And what about love? Can Mara ever trust someone with her heart again after what she's been through? Before I reveal what happens next, I need to know you're still with me. If Mara's journey has touched your heart, hit that like button right now. Let's get this video to our goal so more people can hear this story. More people who might be going through exactly what Mara went through. More people who need to know that walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning. Type in the comments the word empire if you believe that the best revenge is becoming undeniable. I want to see that word flooding the comments because that's exactly what Mara is building. What happens in the next few minutes, Julian never saw coming. And honestly, neither will you. Let's continue. 3 years after walking out of the Pemberton auction house, Mara Sinclair stood at the window of her office on the 23rd floor of a building she owned outright. The city spread out before her. Millions of lives, millions of stories, millions of people struggling and dreaming and hoping just like she had been that night when she called a taxi and left everything behind. Sinclair and Vance had grown from a storage unit gallery into one of the most respected contemporary art houses in the country. Their model, artist-first, story-driven, connection-oriented, had revolutionized how a new generation thought about collecting. They'd been featured in every major arts publication. They'd launched the careers of dozens of previously unknown artists. They'd changed the conversation about what art could mean in people's lives, not status symbols for the wealthy, but bridges between human souls. Mara had changed too, not just professionally, though the numbers spoke for themselves. She had transformed in ways that went far beyond success. She moved through the world differently now. She spoke in meetings without apologizing, without hedging, without the constant fear that she was taking up too much space. She challenged collectors who only cared about resale value. She turned down money from people whose ethics didn't align with her mission, even when turning it down hurt. She had started boxing at a gym near her first apartment and never stopped. The training had nothing to do with vanity. It had everything to do with learning that her body was capable of power, that she could take hits and keep standing, that strength wasn't something other people gave you permission to have. She bought clothes that fit her body instead of hiding it. She cut her hair short because she wanted to look in the mirror and see someone new. She met people's eyes without flinching. She stopped shrinking herself to make others comfortable. And she painted again, for herself this time. Her work hung in her apartment, not for sale, not for show, a private record of her transformation. The early angry pieces were still there, alongside the later ones that glowed with something that looked increasingly like joy. But the real transformation was invisible. It was the quiet certainty that her worth had never been determined by Julian Howick's capacity to see it. Dominic Mercer entered her life on an ordinary Tuesday. She was reviewing proposals for an upcoming auction when her assistant mentioned that a significant collector had requested a personal meeting. This wasn't unusual. Many wealthy people wanted to work directly with Mara after reading about her approach in various profiles. What was unusual was the man who walked into her office. Dominic was tall, with silver threading through dark hair that suggested he was older than his energy implied. He moved with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it, confidence without arrogance, wealth without pretension. "Miss Sinclair." He extended his hand, and his handshake was firm but not performative. "Thank you for making time, Mr. Mercer. Your reputation precedes you." And it did. Dominic Mercer had built a fortune in sustainable technologies, pioneering renewable energy solutions that had made him wealthy while actually helping the world. More recently, he turned his attention to philanthropy, specifically to supporting artists from underrepresented communities who struggled to access the traditional art world. "I've been watching your work for years," Dominic said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "What you've built isn't just a business, it's a philosophy." Mara studied him carefully. She'd learned to distrust compliments from powerful men. "What do you want, Mr. Mercer?" He smiled at her directness. "Honestly, I want to understand how you did it, how you see things so differently from everyone else in this industry. I'm not sure I understand the question. I've met hundreds of people in the art world," Dominic said, leaning forward. "Collectors, dealers, auction house executives, gallery owners. None of them talk about art the way you do. None of them seem to actually care whether the work matters to anyone beyond the buyer. You're different. And I'm curious why." Mara considered her options. She could give him the polished version of her story, the one she'd crafted for press interviews, all triumph and resilience without the messy details. She could deflect with business talk, keep things professional. Instead, she told him the truth. "My ex-husband spent 4 years convincing me I was worthless. He mocked me publicly. He destroyed my confidence systematically. He almost succeeded in erasing who I was." Dominic's expression shifted, not pity, but recognition. "After I left him, I spent years rebuilding myself piece by piece, learning that my perspective wasn't a weakness, it was everything I had to offer. The reason I see things differently is because I know what it's like to be invisible. I know what it means to have your voice dismissed, and I refuse to let that happen to anyone else if I can help it." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "I know that kind of rebuilding," he finally said. "After my wife died, I spent 2 years trying to remember who I was without her, trying to figure out what mattered when the person who mattered most was gone. I'm still figuring it out, honestly. Something shifted between them, not romance, not yet, but recognition. 2 people who understood what it meant to construct a new self from the wreckage of the old. They began meeting regularly after that. Coffee to discuss potential collaborations became dinner to discuss philosophy, art, life. Dinner became walks through galleries where they stood before paintings and shared what they saw, discovering that they saw remarkably similar things. Dominic never tried to diminish her. He challenged her ideas but respected her expertise. He celebrated her successes without taking credit. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke, the way Julian never had, and slowly, carefully, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Trust. "I think I'm falling in love with you," Dominic said one evening. They were standing on his terrace, watching the city lights shimmer against the dark sky. 3 months of growing closeness had led to this moment, this confession she had both hoped for and feared. "I need you to know that," he continued, "so you can decide what you want to do with that information. If you only want friendship, I'll accept that. I'll be grateful for whatever you're willing to give. But I had to be honest." Mara felt her heart racing. Not with fear exactly, though there was fear, but with something else. Possibility. My marriage taught me that giving someone your heart means giving them the power to destroy you, she said quietly. I'm not asking for the power to destroy you. Dominic turned to face her, his eyes steady on hers. I'm asking for the honor of building something alongside you, whatever that looks like, however slowly you need to go. I'm not in any hurry, Mara. I just want to be honest about what I feel. She looked at this man who had sought her out, who had seen her story and recognized not damage but strength, who had shared his own grief and his own rebuilding without shame. I think I'm falling in love with you, too, she said, and that terrifies me more than anything I've ever done. Then let's be terrified together. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. She kissed him for the first time that night, a gentle thing, tentative and hopeful, like the first brushstroke on a blank canvas. And it felt like the final page of a story she'd been writing alone for far too long. The Art World Gala was held in the same venue where, 5 years earlier, Mara Sinclair had walked out on her marriage. The Pemberton auction house looked exactly as she remembered. Crystal chandeliers, walls lined with masterpieces, the scent of expensive perfume and old money. But Mara was not the same woman who had stood near the entrance in a dress she'd saved months to buy, hoping to be invisible. She entered on Dominic's arm, wearing a gown designed by an artist whose career she had launched. Her own gallery's work featured prominently in the evening's exhibition. She was no longer the silent accessory of a man who saw her as decorative. She was one of the most influential figures in the industry. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Across the room, she spotted Julian. He looked older, smaller somehow. The confidence that had once seemed unshakable now had a brittle quality, like gold plating wearing thin to reveal the lead beneath. He stood beside a woman who wore an expression Mara recognized intimately, that particular blend of anxiety and diminishment that marked Julian's partners. His empire had faltered in recent years. Bad investments, scandals involving mistreated employees who had finally found the courage to speak, a reputation for cruelty that had caught up with him at last. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Mara watched Julian process who she had become. Confusion flickered across his face, then disbelief, then something that looked uncomfortable like regret. She felt nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not the triumph she had once imagined this moment would bring, just the quiet knowledge that his opinion had never determined her worth. Dominic noticed her stillness. You okay? More than okay. She smiled, and the smile was genuine. The smile of a woman who had finally stopped waiting for anyone's permission to exist. I was just thinking about something my mother told me once. She said, the day you let someone else's opinion matter more than your own, you stop being yourself. And now, Mara looked around the room, at the artists whose careers she'd launched, at Renata laughing with a collector across the hall, at the walls lined with work that spoke of human souls reaching toward connection. Now I'm finally myself. Everything else is just noise. She turned away from Julian without another glance. He wasn't worth the attention. She took Dominic's hand and walked into the crowd, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. Behind. Her, irrelevant, and growing smaller with every step toward the woman she was still becoming. My beautiful family, Mara's story teaches us something powerful. The people who try to make you small are often terrified of how bright you could shine. Their cruelty says everything about them and nothing about you. Your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. And sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that happens for you, because it forces you to discover who you really are, apart from anyone else's expectations. Mara walked out of that auction house with nothing but her dignity. She ended up building an empire that changed an entire industry. She found love that builds her up instead of tearing her down. She became undeniable, and so can you. May you find the courage to walk away from anyone who dims your light. May you build something beautiful from the ashes of what tried to break you. May you become so undeniably yourself that the opinions of small people become nothing but noise in the symphony of your extraordinary life. If this story touched your heart, I want you to do 3 things for me. First, subscribe to Mr. Andy Love Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that could change your perspective. Second, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be going through what Mara went through. Someone who needs to know that walking away isn't the end, it's the beginning. Third, drop a comment below. Tell me what this story meant to you. Tell me your own story of rising from the ashes. I read every single comment, and your words inspire me to keep creating. Remember, my family, the end is never really the end. It's just the beginning of the next canvas. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, stay undeniably you. This is Mr. Andy, and I love you all.